Hello friends, this is part 2 of Poppy in watercolor, and I first wanted to show you some close-ups to show you what I have done since last we met. In looking at my photograph closer, I got a better sense of where these petals separate. So with my pencil, I lightly penciled in where I'm going to be working today, and some other areas where I need to clarify. But for now, this was just the beginning stages, the first layer, and from here I'm going to be putting on a second layer that will make these highlight and shadow areas more distinct and more visible and more clearly defined. I'm going to enrich my red with some alizarin crimson. It's a good idea with some of the colors to wet them as you begin your painting for the day. And let's see what happens when we use this alizarin crimson for shadow area. As I mentioned in session 1, I love purple, so I'm probably going to be using some purple in this session in addition to using some alizarin crimson. And this is going to help me clearly define my edges. Poppies have a little bit of a ruffled edge, but for the most part what you're seeing is going to be fairly smooth. Here's the purple. I have to be very careful with this because it's going to run in. So I'll just be watching that closely. It's also good at this particular stage to start making some streaks because there are veins in these petals that I want to be subtle. So I want to play around with that while the paint is wet. And go back and suggest them, because while the paint is wet, these areas, excuse me, these areas will definitely create the movement that I want. So as it's drying, I'm going to be working on this. And watching it carefully. Okay, I'm liking the way that's looking. Now remember what I keep saying, the areas where the shadows and the highlights make their colors. Just make sure that you're following those shapes. Work as much as you can on the shapes. This is kind of a complicated little portion of this. I'm ultimately going to try to simplify it somewhat. There are ways to brighten up the watercolor, and that is putting it under glass, which is typically the way watercolors would work. Some more shadow areas right under here. My paper towel has gotten saturated, so just pick up some paint with my paintbrush, which is acceptable. Pull some of that purple out a little bit. And over here, I'll allow this to get too dry. And the same thing is true of these petals over here. in that they have veins. So we can pick up some color going toward the center. It's much better. By creating these little areas, I'm also giving my purple a little track. But while it's wet, especially with a drier brush, you can control where those shadows are going to end up. And notice that I am wiping my brush to dry it off even more. When I go back with the dry brush, it's actually lifting the color up. This area over here is slightly drier. And this particular petal is coming out. The veins are coming out this direction. There will be some veins that I will draw in with my rigger brush. I'm noticing that the sun is going behind the clouds. It's not an extremely cloudy day, but those changes in the light wreak havoc with the light in my video, so sorry about that. Remember, you need 2 containers of water, one for rinsing your brush and the other with clean water. I'm trying to watch what's happening over here as my paint is drying in areas where I've already worked. So I don't want it to get out of hand. Trying to take this opportunity to smooth some of these petals out. I really don't like all those ridgy things that I had going on here. Put a little bit of purple on this edge. Don't need to put very much because it's going to move with that water. Now this is where my other brush comes in. I can do this with the larger brush. But since this one has no paint in it to speak of, actually this might be a good exercise for my reservoir brush, which is actually made by Pentel, this particular one. Yes, that's nice. I'm still wiping the paint out. I like what's happening there. Not so much here. I've realized it depends on the paper as to whether you can eliminate those unwanted lines, which is what I was able to do right there. But if I'm not careful, this part will dry with a line. So make sure I'm in control of the lines that it makes. And one thing I can say for sure, once you get in the habit of doing the right strokes and putting in the right color to start with, will eliminate a lot of the overpainting and will make your painting a lot faster. Using this purple as my shadow color really demands that I pay attention to the shape. And as I said, not allowing it to get out of control. Now it seems a little bit redundant to keep putting paint on and then swabbing it off. But I'm noticing what's happening with the paper. Just like with the others, I want to control how my dried effect will be. I want to make sure that my veins will be in there, but discreet. So let's begin removing. In a direction that will look more like veins when it dries. See how nice this is drying right here. This I'm not too happy with. That's looking nice. These are somewhat broken lines. Just to give the suggestion. I'm noticing from the photograph that this area down here creates a bit of a shadow. There goes that sun again. I want to say a little something about copyright. The photograph that I'm using and photographs that I use in my paintings are my photographs. So I own the copyright to these photographs that I'm using. Now, there are two things that you need to know about copyright. One is what I just told you. If you're going to be copying someone's photo and you intend to put it on the market for sale, then you need to get permission from the photographer, and if there is a fee, you will need to take care of that. Now, that's one thing. That's why I paint from my own photographs. The other thing is, where copyright is concerned, when you're in a class, you do not own the copyright to your painting because it comes under the law pertaining to works for hire. So if you do a painting in a class, you do not have the right to sell it. So keep that in mind. And if you are using someone else's photograph besides your instructors, in this case, you have sort of double whammy. So for one thing, you don't have the option of calling it your own or putting it on the market for sale as your own painting. But you also have a copyright for the person whose photograph you're using. We had this situation come up a few months ago in the class that I was teaching. One of the students brought in a photograph from a newspaper, and he wanted to paint it. Now, all things considered, painting it in a class may or may not come under copyright laws, because you're not selling it, you're not displaying it, and you're not typically you can't sign it either. But because it was a local newspaper and I was able to find the photographer, I did write him and ask him permission to use it. While he maintained the copyright, of course. So all the class wanted to do that particular painting. From that photograph. So we did, and the photographer asked if he could come and take a photograph of the class, and basically their rendition of his composition. So that worked out nicely. This day and time, with all the computer sharing, it's kind of difficult to keep up with who belongs to what. And a lot of people just blatantly copy things. But there's also a lawsuit ahead if you aren't very careful. Yeah, I'm going to put down some of my seed things. But what I'm going to do, since I did not allow for some little highlights in the seeds, I'm going to leave some places. And while this is purple, I'm going to be adding some other colors. I have a visitor, a little gnat coming up here. I think I'm going to use some Payne's gray. No, that's brown. One good reason to lay out your palette systematically is so that you know when you come back to it what color is what. Just like in this case, my Payne's Gray is right next to my dark brown, my raw umber. So it's a little bit hard to tell. Now, as soon as this gets dry, the paint all around it, I'm going to be removing my biscuit. Then I will know better how I need to proceed. These little watercolor brushes with the water reservoir in them. There are other brands, I don't know what they are, but they come in different brush sizes. You can actually buy them in a kit. They come with square brushes as well. I happen to love this one. So I think it's fairly flexible. Have a couple of leaves that require a second layer. Plan to have plenty of paper towels or a sponge or cloth. To dab your brush. Okay, I'm pretty well satisfied with these petals for now. Except for this yellow. That yellow is just not a good idea. Going back over areas that have already dried, especially if you're trying to avoid watermarks, this is possible, but it requires care, I think. Okay, so when this dries completely, I'm going to take off my biscuit, and I'll be ready to work on my leaves